Most people believe they decide what they pay attention to. But watch your mind closely for a moment. Something strange happens. Your attention often moves before you decide anything. You reach for your phone, you unlock it, you scroll, then a quiet question appears. Why did I pick this up? For a moment, your mind searches for a reason, but the uncomfortable truth is this: there was no decision. Your attention moved first, and your mind invented the explanation afterward. Which means something most people never realize. Your mind often explains decisions it never actually made. Remember that. This tiny moment reveals something most people rarely notice about their own mind. They believe they control their attention, but most of the time, their attention is quietly redirected long before they realize it. And the moment attention moves, something else follows. Effort disappears. Discipline collapses. The thing you intended to do quietly vanishes from awareness. Which means the real problem most people struggle with is not motivation. It is something deeper. They never learned how to control the most powerful mechanism inside the mind: attention. They think the problem is motivation. They assume they lack discipline. They believe they need more willpower. But discipline usually fails earlier, at the moment attention quietly left the room. And that explanation misses the real event entirely. Because discipline rarely fails because of willpower. Discipline fails because attention drifted first. And once attention moves, effort collapses almost immediately. This is what we can call attention drift. The quiet moment when focus slides away before you even realize it happened. Attention is the gatekeeper of the mind. Whatever passes through that gate begins shaping behavior. Whatever repeatedly captures attention begins shaping how you think. And over time, it begins shaping who you become. Which leads to an uncomfortable realization.
If you cannot control your attention, you cannot control what your mind builds. And if you cannot control what your mind builds, something else will. Which means habits, discipline, ambition, even identity, begin resting on unstable ground. Because identity itself is built from patterns of repeated attention. This is why two people with equal intelligence and equal opportunity can produce radically different outcomes in their lives. One person learns how to direct attention. The other constantly reacts to whatever captures it. That difference looks small in a single moment, but across months and years, it becomes enormous. Because attention is the invisible force that determines what the mind builds. More than a century ago, the psychologist William James noticed something most people overlook. Your experience is not simply what happens around you. It is what your attention selects. James captured it in a single sentence. My experience is what I agree to attend to. In other words, the direction of your attention quietly becomes the direction of your life. Because attention is not passive. Attention is selection, and selection becomes reality. Every moment of your life is shaped by what your attention selects. Your mind cannot process everything around you. It must choose. And whatever it chooses becomes the reality you experience. The book you focus on becomes knowledge. The distraction you follow becomes lost time. The skill you practice becomes competence. The impulse you indulge becomes a habit. Attention quietly decides all of it. And the disturbing part is how rarely people notice when control disappears. But when you begin observing your own mind honestly, a different picture appears. Attention moves constantly. It reacts to novelty. It reacts to stimulation. It reacts to anything that promises a quick reward. And the modern world has become extraordinarily good at exploiting that tendency. Look carefully at the modern environment around you. Your phone, your apps, every digital platform you open. None of them are neutral. They are built around a single objective: capture your attention, hold it, and redirect it somewhere else. This process has a name: attention capture, the deliberate design of systems that compete for control of your focus. And if you doubt that, watch what happens the next time your phone vibrates. Because whoever controls your attention controls your behavior, and whoever controls your behavior eventually controls the direction of your life. But this influence is rarely obvious. It does not appear as force. It appears as convenience, a quick message, a short video, a harmless glance. Each one feels insignificant, but attention does not experience them as insignificant. Every time attention shifts, the mind reorganizes itself around the new stimulus. Your focus resets. Your mental momentum disappears. The task you intended to do must now compete with whatever captured your attention, and often it loses. Which explains something that frustrates many intelligent people. They understand what they should be doing. They know what matters. They have goals. They have plans. But when the moment arrives to act, something strange happens. Their attention drifts. Not dramatically, just slightly. A quick glance at something easier, a small distraction, a wandering thought, and the difficult task suddenly feels heavier than it did a moment earlier. That is not a coincidence. Attention determines how effort feels. The task did not become harder. Your attention simply stopped supporting it. Remember that. Think about the last time you tried to focus on something difficult. You sat down to work, but within minutes your attention drifted somewhere easier, and suddenly the task felt heavier than it did a moment earlier. The task did not change. Your attention did, which reveals something most people misunderstand about discipline. They believe difficult work requires more effort, but the real problem usually happens earlier. Their attention fractured first. And once attention fractures, even simple tasks begin to feel impossible. When attention locks onto something deeply, effort becomes manageable. When attention fractures, even simple tasks begin to feel exhausting. This is why the cycle feels so frustrating. You know what matters. You understand the goal. You intend to act. But something small happens first. Attention drifts. And the moment attention drifts, effort collapses, which means the real battle inside the mind begins earlier than most people realize. Before discipline, before motivation, before effort. It begins with attention. And attention is not a passive process. It is an active force inside the mind. Two competing systems are constantly fighting over it. One system seeks the easiest possible experience. It is drawn toward novelty, toward stimulation, toward distraction. Its goal is simple: reduce effort, conserve energy, avoid difficulty. The other system is capable of something very different. It can deliberately direct attention toward what actually matters. It can choose difficulty when difficulty produces growth. It can remain steady even when something easier appears. But this second system requires awareness. Without awareness, attention defaults to the first system. The easier direction always wins, which explains why so many people experience a strange form of internal conflict. They know what they should be doing, but their attention keeps sliding somewhere else. And each time it slides, their control weakens slightly. Not because they are weak, because attention was never trained. Most people attempt to train discipline directly. They try to force behavior through sheer effort. But this approach fails for a simple reason. Behavior is downstream. Attention is upstream. If you control attention, behavior follows naturally. If attention remains uncontrolled, discipline becomes a constant struggle. This is why William James believed the ability to voluntarily direct attention was the single most important skill the mind could develop. He described it as the foundation of character.
because the ability to control attention determines what you repeatedly practice, and whatever you repeatedly practice becomes who you eventually become. Which means something quietly profound is happening every moment of your life.
Where your attention goes today, your future begins forming around it. If your attention constantly drifts toward distraction, your mind gradually becomes fragmented. Your ability to focus weakens. Your habits become unstable. Your ambitions slowly dissolve. But if your attention becomes steady, something else begins to happen. Your mind strengthens. Your thinking deepens. Your discipline stabilizes. Your actions start aligning with what actually matters. That is the hidden mechanism behind attention. It is not simply about focus. It is about control. Control over what enters your mind. Control over what your mind builds. Control over who you eventually become. And once you see this clearly, something uncomfortable becomes impossible to ignore. Most people are not losing control of their lives because of a lack of intelligence, or opportunity, or ambition. They are losing control because they never learned how to direct the most powerful mechanism inside their mind: attention. And once attention becomes unstable, everything else becomes unstable with it. But the moment you begin learning how attention actually works, something remarkable happens. You stop trying to force discipline. You stop trying to manufacture motivation. Instead, you begin working at the level where control actually exists, the direction of attention itself. And that shift changes everything. Because once attention becomes deliberate, the mind stops drifting. And when the mind stops drifting, real self-command begins. But something important must be understood here. Attention does not drift randomly. It follows patterns. If you begin observing your mind carefully, you will notice that attention tends to move in predictable directions, toward novelty, toward stimulation, toward whatever promises immediate reward. This is not a character flaw. It is how the brain is built. Your brain is constantly searching for the lowest effort path. Deep thinking costs energy. Sustained attention costs energy. So the moment something easier appears, attention feels a quiet pull toward it. A message notification, a new idea, a memory, a piece of entertainment. Each one offers a small release from effort, and the mind moves toward it almost automatically. This explains a strange experience many people recognize. You can begin a task with genuine intention. You want to do it. You know it matters. But the moment the task becomes mentally demanding, something inside you begins searching for alternatives. A new tab, a different thought, a small distraction. Not because the task is impossible, because the brain prefers the easier direction. Attention slides there naturally, and once attention moves, the entire mental environment changes. The difficult task feels heavier. The easier alternative feels more attractive. And suddenly, discipline feels like a battle. But what actually happened was much simpler. Attention shifted. The task did not change. Your attention did. And because attention changed, your entire perception of the task changed with it. This is why attention control is so powerful. It changes how reality itself feels. When attention locks onto something deeply, the mind begins filtering out competing signals. Distractions lose their intensity. Time feels different. The task becomes immersive. Most people have experienced this state at least once. Reading a book so absorbing that hours pass unnoticed. Working on a project that completely captures your mind. Learning something fascinating that holds your attention effortlessly. In those moments, discipline feels almost unnecessary, because attention has already done the work. The mind organizes itself around the object of focus. Everything else fades. This is the opposite of what happens when attention fragments.
When attention keeps jumping from stimulus to stimulus, something subtle happens. The mind never stabilizes. Every interruption forces a reset. Every reset drains a little more mental energy, until eventually your mind adapts to something much smaller. Short bursts of focus, constant switching, shallow engagement. Depth quietly disappears. At first, this feels harmless, but over time, something more serious begins to happen. Your capacity for sustained attention weakens.
And when sustained attention weakens, depth disappears. And every reset quietly destroys momentum. Momentum is where deep thinking begins. Remember that. Your ability to think deeply depends on it. Complex ideas require extended focus. Understanding difficult concepts requires time and mental stability. But if attention constantly fractures, the mind never remains in one place long enough to build understanding. Everything becomes shallow. Quick reactions replace careful thought. Immediate stimulation replaces meaningful effort. This is why attention control is not simply about productivity. It is about protecting the structure of your mind, because the quality of your thinking is determined by the stability of your attention, and the stability of your attention determines what kind of person you are capable of becoming. A distracted mind produces distracted behavior. A focused mind produces deliberate behavior. Over time, those patterns become identity, which is why William James believed attention was the foundation of character itself. Not because attention is dramatic, but because it quietly determines what you practice every day. And whatever you practice every day eventually becomes who you are. So the real question is not whether distractions exist. They always will. The real contest is something else entirely. Ownership. Ownership of attention. Distractions will always exist. The real question is whether your attention belongs to you, or whether it belongs to whatever stimulus happens to appear in front of you. Because if attention constantly reacts to external signals, something subtle happens. Your mind becomes reactive. Your thoughts become reactive. Your behavior becomes reactive. And gradually, your life becomes reactive as well. You move from stimulus to stimulus, task to task, impulse to impulse, without ever directing your attention long enough to shape something meaningful. But the moment attention becomes deliberate, the entire structure of your mind begins to change. You stop reacting automatically. You begin choosing where your mind will remain. And that single change transforms the entire experience of effort. Difficult things become possible. Complex ideas become understandable. Long-term goals become realistic. Not because you suddenly became more motivated, because you finally gained control over the mechanism that determines what your mind works on: attention. And once you begin seeing attention this way, something surprising becomes clear. The real battle for control of your life is not fought in dramatic moments of discipline. It is fought in seconds. The seconds where attention decides where the mind will live. Remember that. It is fought in tiny moments of attention. The moment you choose whether to follow a distraction, the moment you decide whether to remain with a difficult idea, the moment you notice your attention drifting and bring it back. These moments appear small, but they accumulate into something enormous. Because every time you reclaim your attention, you strengthen the part of the mind capable of directing it. And every time you allow attention to drift automatically, the opposite happens. Your mind becomes easier to capture, easier to redirect, easier to control. Which means the ability to direct attention is not simply a productivity skill. It is the beginning of psychological sovereignty. You could call this attention sovereignty. The moment your focus stops reacting automatically
and begins moving under your direction. And once you understand that, the entire struggle of discipline begins to look different. You stop asking how to force yourself to act. You begin asking something far more important. Where is my attention going? Because wherever attention goes repeatedly, your life will eventually follow it there. By now, something important should be becoming clear.
The real problem most people face is not that they are incapable of discipline. It is that their attention is constantly being redirected before discipline ever has a chance to act. Which means the question is no longer simply how to become more disciplined. The real question becomes much more precise. How do you actually take control of your attention? Correction. Because if attention truly determines what your mind builds, then the ability to guide it deliberately becomes one of the most powerful forms of self-command. This is exactly what William James believed. James argued that attention is not merely something that happens to us. It is something that can be trained, not easily, not instantly, but deliberately. He described voluntary attention as the mind's ability to hold itself steady on an object, even when easier alternatives appear. In other words, attention control is not the absence of distraction, it is the ability to return. The mind will wander, that is inevitable, but the trained mind notices the wandering sooner and brings attention back deliberately, again and again and again. At first, this feels frustrating. You try to focus, a thought appears. You follow it. Then suddenly, you remember you meant to stay with the original task. You bring your attention back. A few seconds later, it drifts again. You bring it back again. To many people, this feels like failure. But James understood something important. This process is not failure. It is training. Every time you notice attention drifting and return it deliberately, you strengthen the mental mechanism responsible for directing attention, which means attention control develops the same way physical strength develops, through repetition. Each return is a repetition. Each repetition strengthens the system that governs attention. Over time, something subtle begins to change. The mind wanders less frequently. Attention stabilizes more quickly.
Focus becomes easier to sustain, not because distractions disappear, but because the mind has learned how to recover control more efficiently. This is the hidden skill behind concentration. People often assume that highly focused individuals possess extraordinary discipline, but what they actually possess is something more fundamental. They have trained their attention, which means their mind does not remain captured by distractions for long. It notices the shift, it returns, and gradually the length of sustained attention begins to increase. But there is another layer to this process that is even more important. Attention is not only something you control internally, it is also something your environment constantly influences. Every environment sends signals that pull attention in different directions. A quiet room encourages focus.
A room filled with stimulation fractures it.
A phone placed within reach invites distraction. A phone placed out of sight removes a powerful trigger. These signals seem insignificant, but the mind treats them as invitations. Every notification, every open tab, every flashing icon, each one quietly asks the same question. Do you want to look here instead? Most people never notice how often their attention answers yes. Notifications, tabs, devices, background noise. Each one quietly competes for attention, and eventually, something captures it. Which means learning to control attention requires two forms of discipline. The first is internal. learning to notice when the mind drifts. The second is structural, designing environments that reduce unnecessary attention capture. Without this second form of discipline, the first becomes far more difficult. Imagine trying to read while someone taps you on the shoulder every 30 seconds. Eventually, your attention will break. The modern digital environment functions in almost exactly the same way. Notifications interrupt, messages appear, applications compete for engagement. Every interruption resets attention, and every reset drains mental energy. Which is why many people experience a strange form of exhaustion after hours of shallow digital engagement. Their mind has been switching attention repeatedly without ever stabilizing long enough to recover. The brain was not designed for constant attentional switching. It was designed for cycles of focus and rest. When those cycles are disrupted continuously, the mind becomes fatigued, which is why sustained attention now feels harder for many people than it did in the past. Not because people are weaker, because the environment has become more aggressive in capturing attention. Understanding this changes how you approach discipline entirely. Instead of blaming yourself for losing focus, you begin examining the forces competing for your attention.
You begin asking a different question. What in my environment is constantly pulling my attention away? Sometimes the answer is obvious: the phone on the desk, the open browser with multiple tabs, the constant stream of notifications. Sometimes the forces are subtler: habitual checking, curiosity impulses, the quiet urge to escape difficulty. Each one acts as a small hook pulling attention away from the thing you meant to do, which means attention control is not achieved through force. It is achieved through awareness and design. You learn to notice when attention drifts, and you reshape the environment so fewer forces compete for it. Gradually, something remarkable happens. Attention becomes steadier. Tasks that once felt exhausting become manageable. Longer periods of focus become possible. And with longer periods of focus, something even more valuable begins to emerge: depth. Deep thinking requires uninterrupted attention. Complex ideas require time. Understanding something meaningful often requires remaining with it long after the first impulse to leave appears. But once attention stabilizes, this becomes possible. The mind begins exploring ideas more thoroughly. Connections appear. Insights emerge. The experience of thinking itself becomes richer. This is why attention control is not merely about productivity. It is about reclaiming the depth of your own mind. Because the mind that constantly switches attention cannot build anything substantial. It skims the surface of everything. It reacts, it consumes, but it rarely creates. A steady mind operates differently. It builds. It connects ideas. It develops skill. It shapes character. This is where attention becomes something deeper than focus. It becomes sovereignty. Because sovereignty begins the moment your mind stops reacting to every stimulus around it and starts deciding what deserves your attention and what does not. At that point, something fundamental shifts. The world stops pulling your attention everywhere, and you begin directing it instead. Which means the struggle you have experienced with distraction is not a personal flaw. It is a sign that the most powerful mechanism inside your mind has never been consciously trained. But the moment you begin training it, the effects ripple outward into every other part of life. Habits become easier to maintain. Learning becomes easier to sustain. Decisions become clearer. Because the mind is no longer scattered across dozens of competing signals. It is directed, stable, deliberate. And when attention becomes deliberate, discipline no longer feels like constant resistance. It begins to feel like alignment. The mind and your intentions begin moving in the same direction. Which brings us to a final realization. Most people spend years trying to force themselves into discipline. They attempt to control outcomes directly, but outcomes are the final link in the chain. The chain begins earlier. Attention determines thought. Thought determines behavior. Behavior determines habit. Habit determines character. And character quietly shapes the life you eventually build. Which means the smallest shift in that chain produces the largest consequences. And the smallest shift is the one most people overlook. Where attention goes. If you control that, you begin controlling everything that follows. This is the lesson William James understood more clearly than most people today. The mind is not governed through force. It is governed through attention. Train attention, and the rest of the system begins to organize itself. Ignore attention, and the system fragments. Which leaves you with a final question. Not how disciplined you are, but something much more revealing. Where is your attention going every day? Because wherever it goes repeatedly, your life is quietly being built there. But once you begin seeing attention this way,
another realization appears. Control over attention is not dramatic. It rarely feels heroic. Most of the time, it appears in very small moments. A moment when your mind begins drifting and you notice it. A moment when the urge to check something appears and you decide to remain where you are. A moment when the task becomes difficult and instead of escaping it, you stay with it just a little longer. These moments seem insignificant, but they are not insignificant to the mind. Every time you reclaim your attention, you reinforce the system responsible for directing it. You are teaching your mind something. You are teaching it that the easier path does not automatically win. You are teaching it that attention can be held deliberately, and over time, that lesson compounds. The first changes are subtle. You begin noticing distractions sooner. The impulse to drift becomes visible earlier. Instead of losing 20 minutes to distraction, you lose 2. Then eventually the impulse appears and passes without moving your attention at all. At that point, something important has happened. Your attention is no longer reacting automatically. It is being directed. And when attention becomes directed, the mind becomes quieter. Not empty, but ordered. Thoughts appear and pass without immediately pulling you away. You remain where you choose to remain. And this creates a new relationship with your own mind. Instead of constantly chasing attention, you begin governing it. This is the beginning of what philosophers have long described as self-mastery. Not the elimination of distraction, not perfect discipline, but the ability to guide the movement of your own awareness. Once that ability strengthens, the effects spread into every other part of life. Learning becomes deeper, habits become more stable, decisions become clearer. Because the mind is no longer scattered across endless stimuli, it is anchored, directed, under your authority. This is why William James believed attention was the foundation of character. Because character is not built from occasional decisions. It is built from repeated patterns of attention. What you return to every day. What you practice every day, what you allow your mind to dwell on. Those patterns eventually become who you are, which means something quietly powerful is always happening, right now, in this moment. Your attention is shaping your future. Every direction it moves is a vote for the kind of mind you are building, a distracted mind or a deliberate one. And the difference between those two minds determines far more than productivity. It determines the level of sovereignty you possess over your own life. Because the person who cannot control their attention
will always feel pulled by forces they do not understand, while the person who can direct attention deliberately gains something much more valuable than productivity. They gain authority over their own mind. And when you gain authority over your own mind, you gain the ability to shape everything that follows. Which is why the real question is no longer whether distractions exist. They always will. The real question is whether your attention belongs to the world around you, or whether it finally belongs to you. If this helped you see your own attention more clearly, take a moment to like the video. And if you want to keep developing that kind of control over your mind, subscribe to the channel.